Well, thanks everybody for coming to the Janesville Police Department for a discussion on our future police training. And we believe this police training will guide this agency for probably the next 10 years. I want you to ponder for a moment and think about the policing profession. We take young men and women fresh out of college, 22, 23 years old. We send them to the police academy. We put them through field training for probably another 3 or 4 months. And then we put them out into our communities alone, by themselves, in the middle of the night, holidays and weekends. And we ask them to solve our community's toughest problems. We give them the toughest issues our communities have. And when those officers show up on scene, typically they know less than anybody else that is there. Yet everybody on that scene looks to the officer to make an immediate decision. And some of those decisions cannot be changed, particularly when you're talking about use of force. And we all expect excellence. We expect that officer to get it 100% right. An unique ending to this story is that 99% of the time, those officers deliver. But it is with good selection of police officers, good organizational values, and good police training that drive that result. Earlier in 2016, the Janesville Police Department received a federal grant, and we decided to use that federal grant for various types of police training. One of those trainings was de-escalation of force. And we asked our officers, we asked our supervisors to look across this nation and look for the best training in this nation and bring it back to the Janesville Police Department. If we needed to send our officers to LA, that's where they would go. If we needed to send them to New York, that's where they would go. So in our search for this training, we found that the PERF training, Police Executive Research Forum, we believed offered the best training for our organization. It was held in New Orleans in December, and we put together this team that is joining me here today to be sent down to New Orleans and learn of the training. It's called ICAT, Integrating Communications, Assessment and Tactics, and bring that training back to the police department. The goal of this training is to assure that our officers have the best tools and skill set possible to assure the safety of our citizens and to assure the safety of our officers. I'd like to introduce the team. These are going to be the leaders that will be offering training for the next 3 years out through 2020. But we believe that training and these policy changes will actually live for a decade. Will drive the values of this organization for a decade. Will assure the safety of our citizens for a decade. Will assure the safety of our officers for a decade. To my immediate left is Lieutenant Tim Hires. He was the administrative component of our training. He is also a DAT instructor. To my immediate right is Sergeant Blazer. He is the lead supervisor with our CIT training and is also assigned to SWAT. Officer Perkins is with us. He's the second man down on my left. He is a DAT instructor and a SWAT member. To his immediate left is Officer Winarski. He is a DAT instructor and a SWAT instructor. To Sergeant Blazer's right is Officer Clements. He is our CIT co-facilitator and is important in the organization with our efforts with our mentally ill and CIT, and is a trainer for that. And over on the far right is Officer Briggs. He is assigned as a negotiator for the department and is also one of our domestic violence intervention officers and offered services for this. So this team was selected based on the skill sets that I have described. These are the officers that are going to develop the training for the organization and deliver the training over the next 3 years. This training is consistent with other training we've had, including implicit bias and procedural justice. It is a very good fit for where this organization's training has taken us so far. So with that, I'm going to turn the matter over to Lieutenant Hires, and he can start with the explanations of the training.
Okay, I just want to sort of direct you to a chart that I have up here that sort of conceptualizes the training in a nutshell. Right now, the kind of the fundamental core groups that we have that we train on in the state of Wisconsin and uniform around the country is what we call DAT, D-A-A-T. It's the Defense and Arrest Tactics. There's professional communication. There's vehicle contacts. So there's firearms. So there's different disciplines that we have within the department that we train on. Some is mandated training that we have to go through throughout the year. This is a study that PERF did, and it sort of framed the training that in service, so departments do on their own at their agencies throughout the country. It's a survey that they had sent out. And if you see that 93% of departments, they do in-service training is made up of firearms. When you get down to the type of training that we're talking about here with ICAT, which is focusing on more of the communication and de-escalation type training, which Sergeant Blazer will talk more specifically in a minute here, you see that most departments it's down around at 65%. So bringing this training here to the city of Janesville, we're not talking about necessarily doing anything new or different. Some of this training that we already do. What we're trying to do is sort of rebalance the training. Right now we disproportionately train to firearms. We train every other month on that. We train during in-service on different types of deadly force encounters. But what we want to do is we want to do some more focusing on the de-escalation type training, without taking away from the firearms that we're already doing. And we have some incidents that have occurred at our agency over the years. Actually, we just had within the last few weeks here where de-escalation has worked and it's resolved incidents out there. Sergeant Blazer will talk a little bit more about that. So we've had those successful things, and the reason that we're bringing ICAT here is because we just don't want to become complacent at it. We know that we have success at it, we know that it works, and this is just sort of that next step that we want to take, which is why we're sort of extending this out beyond just a 1-2 year type thing. We expect this to be a culture change at the police department, which is what it is, I think, throughout the country, what's actually occurring. But a lot of this is going to start with our policy. Right now, we have written policies that require firearms training. Officers have to qualify to a certain standard before that they go out on the street, even ones who have been here for 15, 20 some years. That same standard is held from the chief on down. Everyone has to go through that training. We don't necessarily have our policies in line for using that with de-escalation type training. We want to also bring that same type of standard, chief on down, to everyone here at the agency. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we're going to be doing over the course of the next few years. It will be a step-stone approach to that, and specifically some of those things Sergeant Blazer can speak to.
So picking up where Lieutenant Hires left
One
off.
second, Chief, can you move the microphones down, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So picking up where Lieutenant Hires left off, being a patrol sergeant and a team leader on our SWAT team, I'm in a very unique position to help set the pace when we have calls for service that involve crisis. One of the things we talk about through this training and that we'll be implementing more directly is the tactical pause. When we talk about our response to people in crisis, we look around the country at 63 million police contacts every year, 47 million people involved in a mental health event every year. So the lion's share of some of the stuff that we see every day as patrolmen is that mental health related component or that person in crisis. So as a supervisor, part of my job is to set that pace, give that tactical pause, so when things are starting to escalate, when things are starting to get ramped up because somebody in mental crisis isn't seeing things the same way that you or I see things, how do we set a pause there and bring that back? Communication is the key factor in making that work for us. Using a tone of voice, using a pace with your communication that helps de-escalate that person as opposed to just shouting commands at somebody. Can we bring them back down to our level instead of using vicarious enthusiasm and rising up to their level? So as we integrate that, we're not taking tools away from our guys. What we're doing is we're adding a valuable tool to their day, giving them the moment they need to just take a breath, add that communication, and let it move forward from there. When we talk about SWAT versus patrol, there's a significant difference in the patrol response and the SWAT response. What we're talking about with our training doesn't eliminate the need for SWAT teams. There is absolutely a need for SWAT teams to be in place in police departments and a function for them. What we're talking about is using that SWAT team when they're specifically needed as opposed to allowing a situation to escalate past that communicative level that a patrolman can handle. So working through the two components that I work with, SWAT and CIT, we've worked out policy changes and worked on processes to help de-escalate that and evaluate the situation we're going to. Do we really need a SWAT team there? Can we just start with hostage negotiations? Can we actually walk away from a call for service like that? And one of the calls for service that I can illustrate is in the not too distant past, we had some supervisors, patrolmen respond to somebody who was in crisis. Became armed, they're in the home alone, they weren't being charged with any criminal violation. Can we step away from that? Can we put some resources in place to follow up, check on them, de-escalate and withdraw from the scene? That's actually what happened. Officer Briggs did the follow-up on that case. He could speak to that more eloquently. But what it illustrates is that we're able to take that tactical pause and step away from the call and resolve it peacefully. The other key component here, I'm going to let Officer Clements talk to this degree next, is talking to somebody in mental health crisis and how they perceive what we're doing and what's important to them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Officer Clements.
So one of our roles in our department crisis intervention team is to educate other officers on dealing with people with mental illness. The key points that we try to get across as it relates to de-escalation is realizing that a person in a mental health crisis, their perception is their reality. And a simple example that I share with the officers is a couple years ago, we all remember the whole black and white versus gold dress. Everybody had a different perception of what color it was, but it was reality to them. And just getting officers to understand that, and that builds empathy in dealing with the person. And Sergeant Blazer talks about tactical pause. Tactical pause, we talk about slow it down, soften it up. Talk to this person like they're a family member, like you would like somebody to talk to your family member who's in a mental health crisis. And giving yourself time and distance so that situation doesn't escalate, and trying to talk your way through it. We do offer a 40-hour course that officers go through in our department on the crisis intervention team training, and they learn about all different kinds of mental illnesses, medication that's involved in it, techniques as far as active communication goes, and then there's scenario-based training at the end where they're asked to implement what they've learned in the class and take feedback from mental health experts as far as how they're doing. I think it goes very much in line with the recent ICAT training that we've received. Did you want to talk about the follow-up?
So in regards to what Sergeant Blazer was talking about, it was actually a veteran who was having some post-traumatic stress disorder issues while being intoxicated. And this happened in the middle of the night, so obviously responses were quicker from patrol and slower for crisis intervention and mental health services. Because this person was a veteran, a combat veteran, I spoke with him the next day when he was sober and knew I was coming, and got him in touch with the VA hospital in Madison. And from what this person told me was that he wasn't homicidal, nor was he suicidal. He goes through this about once or twice a year, where he, it's the anniversary date to a certain point in his military career that basically sets it off. It was alcohol induced, along with the post-traumatic stress disorder. So just by officers backing away, there was no public danger. It was him in the house by himself with a loaded handgun threatening to shoot anyone that came into the house. So we backed off, called him the next morning, asked if I could meet with him. I met with him outside of his house. Eventually went into his house and had a long conversation where I put him in phone contact with the VA hospital in Madison through contacts that I have, and eventually got him to do outpatient treatment at the VA hospital. We also used this recently in a vehicular pursuit with a suicidal male, where we had the officers end the pursuit, so slow speeds down while the officers ended their pursuit. I contacted the suspect on the phone, ended up meeting him in Stoughton in a public parking lot, and talked him into coming back to the healthcare center in Rock County here for inpatient treatment. So these do have their benefits as far as us not barking orders, as some of the officers and supervisors have said. People generally don't like being told what to do, and this gives them the opportunity to have some pride and ownership in their decisions, even though eventually they're complying with what we ask them to do.
Officer Briggs, could you compare and contrast, I'm going to direct you to the Chestnut event with a military person. What in the old world, and for decades and decades of police work, what did the old response look like? What would we have done?
Being that this was an armed subject, making threats of harm to officers and himself, we would have most likely called the SWAT team out, and Sergeant Blazer can probably go into more detail with this, but we would have used tactics that a SWAT team uses to go in there and get that person. This resulted in no extra personnel, and no danger to the person. And all in all, it's valuing the sanctity of human life for everyone involved. Its officers go home at the end of their shift safe. The person in crisis ends up safe and getting the help that they need. So this is a total turnaround compared to what we would have done 20 years ago. The police are still involved and still in control of the situation, but not to the point where the control is, I guess, forced. It's now controlled chaos, basically what it is. We're controlling, we're taking that tactical pause to step back and understand this isn't a go right now where we have to go in there and this is a time element thing. We can take our time and let this person kind of calm down through communication.
If you guys can picture it, to illustrate what happens on these events, if you can picture somebody in mental health crisis feeling like they're being backed into a corner, like they have no option. Communication is an option. It's a tactic that we use. It's not always tools. Communication becomes a trained tactic that we can use to help widen that corner out so that they can communicate with us and eventually walk towards us where they feel safe and where we can help them. As opposed to, like Officer Briggs mentioned, 20 years ago, closing that corner in through a typical tactical response that I think we've all seen on TV shows and movies over the years, and forcing that encounter to become more and more critical and potentially have a negative outcome. So we're just widening that corner by the use of communication to allow them to come to us.
Is the situation where you have a person who might have ended up in that SWAT team going into the house to get the guy situation, is that the only focus of this training, or are there other kinds of situations?
No.
Or is it that kind of situation?
No, I'll give you an
Can we move the mics down, please?
I'll give you a great example from this past week. I'm going to be a little bit loose about the details, but in the past week, we had a call for service at one of our medical facilities. Somebody who was in mental health crisis after being injured. The medical staff needed some assistance trying to control this subject so that they could medically treat him. Subject was suicidal. They asked for our assistance, and in the old world, that was going to be hands-on. How do we hold this person down so that they can get the medical assistance they need for their injuries? When I showed up on scene, talked to the officers, talked to the medical staff, and the security staff, and asked who had rapport. And once we established that we had somebody on the floor that had rapport, it didn't matter who it was, can we now insert that person and have a conversation and bring them down to a level where they can talk? Fortunately for us, we had that through a security guard. We diverted to him with some coaching from us, and we worked through a conversation, and eventually the person received the medical treatment they needed without any use of force by law enforcement or medical staff. So this is not always a SWAT thing. A lot of times it's a patrol response, and how do we get to the safest resolution possible by working through our DAT training. And Officer Perkins, Officer Minarski can speak more eloquently about our DAT training, both being instructors, but they can talk how just presence is part of our response and a level of our DAT training.
Is it difficult to balance, I guess, officer safety and public safety with de-escalation? Like, to know the point of like, okay, this cannot be de-escalated, we must now escalate?
It's a fine line, you're absolutely right. And the supervisor's responsibility is to come in and evaluate that. And I think just based on your question, you understand how quickly that can change and how officers have to make decisions very quickly. The supervisor gets the opportunity to oversee the entire incident and help the officers make those decisions and work through the incident. For us, communication will always be part of our tactical response. It'll be part of our method of handling these situations, and all we can hope for is that it works the way we want. Do these incidents go another way all over the country? They absolutely do. And there's a clear difference between people who are experiencing just a mental health event, who are not criminals, and people who are criminals who are now not obeying or following law or lawful command.
I'd like to touch on that point a little bit. De-escalation is officer safety. It reduces injuries to police officers. So rather than rushing and putting yourself in a situation where you may get hurt, now you're taking that tactical pause, you're holding back, and you're talking your way through it. That's safer for everybody involved. So it really isn't at odds with each other. A lot of times you're a lot safer using these de-escalation techniques.
How does that, so is that now a policy or approach that all officers are asked to take with them out to the field when they come across someone who's in this highly agitated state? Or is that's going to be the training going forward?
Yeah, well, I think it's an awareness is what it is. So what you're trying to do is have the officer make an assessment between difference between someone who's exhibiting assaultive behavior and someone who's in crisis, which is in fact, that could be a fine line, but you're trying to make that determination about someone who's in that crisis mode where you want to de-escalate that. So another example is we had an incident recently here where we had a shooting involved where one of the people fled into a house, barricaded himself in there. You know, that's not a de-escalation situation. There's an armed subject who is, involved in an attempted homicide who's now barricaded himself into a house. So that's an applicable use of a SWAT team for that, but we're not in a mode of identifying at that point that this person is actually in a mental crisis. And that's where a lot of these incidents you see around the country are occurring is someone standing on the street corner, they're holding a knife, they're standing there, and they're making threats, or they're telling themselves, have the officer shoot me. They're saying, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me, and they're standing there. And we've all seen those videos where you'll see the shots fired, and then the person is ultimately killed. Well, we are identifying that person as being in crisis. That person needs, services. We've had instances like that, where through the same type of action, the officers have identified this person as in crisis, and they've been able to talk them down. and it's been resolved without having to go to the deadly force. So that's sort of that fine line, that's what this training is. So what we're trying to do is bring more awareness to that, and that's what I'm talking about where you're rebalancing it. We're doing a lot of the stuff right now with use of force, with deadly force encounters, and the entire country is for that matter. What we're trying to do is increase that awareness on these other types of incidences, and so it's a multiple approach through different disciplines at the police department.
Do you expect then more instances where police do that rather than go to escalation quicker going forward then?
I think what you're going to see is this training is going to be systemic in this organization, and its application will be with every encounter we have with every citizen in this community.
Every country.
Communication is basically 95% of our job. Any call we go on, you're communicating with somebody. So if we can minimize anger, hurt feelings, and still the end result is effective law enforcement or effective education, that's the goal.
How will you determine if this has been a success?
That's why we searched the nation and looked for the best training in the nation. And we believe the PERF training is the best. This was well vetted by many professionals throughout the nation, and it has been explained as the future of law enforcement. So as opposed to us researching and perhaps taking a guess as to what we think is best, we are depending upon professionals throughout the United States and this project and this process and bringing it here.
You say you've done this sort of thing in the past. So how does this training make it? I know Lieutenant Hire said you're going to be emphasizing this more in training. Is that the new thing?
It's certainly been a process. We have done much training on the department, and we have believed in this process, if you will. Implicit bias training, procedural justice training. If you recall, last year we did the de-escalation training up at Gander Mountain, where we put officers through simulations and had them work through de-escalation. Frankie went through that. Councilmember Dupree with us, so she also went through that. And putting our officers in those circumstances, learning those skill sets of de-escalation and being successful with it. So, while we had been heading this direction, and apparently we were heading the right direction, this is confirmation of the training we've already done and a continuation of that training. And now we're able to put together this 3-year plan that'll take us out to 2020. And I think it'll change this organization for the next decade.
Was there a specific event that caused your department to look for what you said, the best training in America? Was there something that set you off to look for that?
We need to speak to the perspective of this organization. We constantly look at what are the threats to the citizens of this community. And at the same time, we're looking over the horizon and what are the threats to our citizens on a national level? And what problem sets do we think may come to Janesville? So as we look at those two elements, what's going on in our community and what's going on a national narrative, that got us to this type of training that we think will suit our agency well for many years to come. No one event.
And Chief, you said that, or let me rephrase the question. Actually, you said that the police work is 95% communication. However, I look up there and I see firearms to be 93% of the training, whereas communication is smack dab bottom at 63. I guess what took you guys so long to kind of look at this as like we need to communicate more instead of use force more?
These are national numbers. I don't know that ours differs greatly, but there certainly is a national awareness that we need to communicate better. And you've seen these videos on a national basis where things didn't go well. And we believe that if we give our officers that skill set to where they can communicate well, where they can calm these situations down, and we can resolve it at that level, that is better for our citizens and it's better for our officers. But I gotta tell you, that question is really better suited for these guys because they went to the training, I didn't.
One of the things I can tell you from the training, maybe to speak to the reputation of PERF, is that we met representatives from New York, LA, Detroit, Houston, just about every venue in the country, along with the international community, Canada, Scotland, Ireland, Pakistan. They came to this training because they felt this was the right direction. While Officer Graves is telling you that 95% of our job is communication, he's absolutely right. And what we reassured ourselves at PERF was that we're going the right direction. We're already doing a lot of these things, and what we find from the training, the way they package ICAT, is that we have a repackaged plan to move forward with it. It helps us put together a training program that's effective with our current philosophy and where we want the organization to go and how we see our profession from the city of Janesville.
So the good thing that, or one of the good things that could happen from this, tell me if I'm saying that this is wrong, but there'll be fewer instances where a police officer potentially will have to draw his weapon, deal with a suicide by cop kind of situation, or someone threatening officer's situation, and dealing with that with deadly force.
Absolutely. We expect that there will be less use of force or lower levels use of force based upon this training. That being said, there still will be times where a high level of force is appropriate, and there will be times where deadly force is appropriate. But we want to provide our officers that wide array of skill sets so we can keep it on the lower level of force. But if the circumstances are appropriate, we still need to train our officers to use that higher level of force and deadly force.
How long before you feel that all the officers are fully trained?
We have decided upon a 3-year project.
So that's the length of the training period so that everyone gets the training.
This team is tasked with building a 3-year plan for the Janesville Police Department, and we think that that will extend us out over a decade. You might ask, well, why don't you do it in 6 months? Part of that plan is repeated training and reaffirming the training out over the 3 years. We know that doing some training in 2017 and doing no more training forever is probably not going to be very effective. But having a long-term commitment to this training and reaffirming this training over a 3-year period will have a longer effect. After 3 years, we'll reassess where we're at, but we think this is going to help us out for a decade.
Do you suspect any area departments to be watching closely at what you guys are doing?
I do.
So, Janesville Police Department is going to be different than other departments in how it handles these kinds of situations.
I think so. Again, let these officers speak. They spoke with many more agencies than I did.
I know Beloit was there, other agencies from Wisconsin. Was there? Cudahy, Milwaukee, PD was there. Sheboygan PD. So there's other agencies there from around the state were there as well. So it's just coming to Wisconsin.
Chief, let me just check something on the news release. That this was the first time this training was given, or was it to a department that had committed to doing this department-wide or something to that effect? Is that?
To my knowledge, this is PERF's rollout of this training. Have I got that right, guys?
Yeah.
First time they gave the training to
Yes.
anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, what they did is they rolled it out to some pilot sites, and off the top of my head, 6 or 8 throughout the country. Different, well, mostly larger size agencies, mid to large size agencies, were some pilot sites for it. So they had the pilot sites go through it. After that, then they compiled this in and then brought everyone in to view it. It was about 400 people in attendance there. I don't know how many agencies it was were at this.
150.
150 agencies.
Wow. So, you got this for free from them, are they like government subsidized, or how do they pay for all that? You know?
They're a not-for-profit research organization. I can tell you our membership costs the Janesville Police Department $450 a year, and that's based upon how many police officers we have, so that's largely their income source. There may be others. PERF is very concerned about this issue. It's a critical issue in America. They moved this project along, in my opinion, very quickly. It turned out to be very good timing for us because we were in search for what we felt were the right answers for our community, and the stars aligned and we were able to send this team.
Chief, what are you most excited about and what makes you most nervous about this?
I am most excited about keeping our officers safe, knowing that they can show up for work, get through their duty day and go home to their families, and keeping our citizens safe and knowing that we will provide the best product that we can to our citizens to keep them safe. What am I concerned about? It's a pretty positive project. Just keep moving on it. I think you sense that we're dedicated to it. I know a lot of people that go to a lot of training and that's where it stops. These people are dedicated to making this thing work. I think in short order we'll be moving forward with it. But we wanted to share with all of you and the community